and dying, to wrestle with values, to contemplate the worth of persons and times and things. We are here to worship, as they have said of old, to worth-shape. We are here in common assembly, and we approach the highest and the deepest. We are here in deliberate meeting, where we forge and forage for the Spirit and not the letter. We will greet this hour with the song of our hearts and minds and souls, that we may be true to ourselves, true to each other, and true to the vision of what it is we are becoming. Come, whoever you are, and wherever you are on your life's journey, you are welcome here today. Let us worship together.
There's lots of you today. So excited. Okay, now the only rule is that you have to keep your hands and your feet and everything to yourselves. Come on up, Nate. There's room for you. There's room. We got room for everybody. So how is everyone feeling this morning? Good, okay. Well, I was going to start squashed. Okay, can I move a little? There, is that more room? Okay, so I wanted to start today with some words from a Chinese man who lived a very long time ago. And he was really a smart guy. He had some really great ideas. His name was Lao Tzu. And he said, if there is to be peace in the world, there must be peace in the nations. If there is to be peace in the nations, there must be peace in the cities. If there is to be peace in the cities, there must be peace between neighbors. If there is to be peace between neighbors, there must be peace in the home. And if there is to be peace in the home, there must be peace in the heart. So what do you think about that message? Do we live in a world that's a peaceful world?
Yeah, not really.
Not all that. There's different opinions about. Sometimes it's peaceful. Overall, not really. There's what we call wars going on, right? When we think about the nations, there's nations who are fighting with each other, right? What happens when there's war? When there are wars?
People get killed. People get killed.
Right. And is it just the soldiers that get killed?
No. People can turn out homeless, and they can't have enough food, and sometimes they They don't really even have clean drinking water.
Right. Sometimes those are the things that people are fighting about, right? Right, so that they have access to those things. So there are a lot of reasons why wars happen. Sometimes it's about different ideas or different access to resources, like Josette was saying. But when wars happen, it's not just the soldiers that die. Sometimes innocent people die, too. So what about in our nation? Do you think we live in a peaceful nation? Is there peace in our cities and in our neighborhoods? Reasonably. It seems like maybe things are a little more peaceful here than some other places in the world. But really, even in our cities, and maybe even at your schools, there are people who think that the best way to solve problems is by fighting about it. And so there are lots of people in the world right now who are thinking that maybe there's a different way, that we should maybe work to create a more peaceful world. And a lot of those people are Unitarian Universalists. And today we're going to be talking about that with the grown-ups and then having a meeting about it after church. So let's get back to Lao Tzu. So what he said was that if there is to be a peaceful world, it has to start in our hearts, right? So everybody said that they were feeling good today, except you were feeling squashed. We have a lot of different feelings, right? Sometimes you might wake up and you might be sleepy, or you might be grumpy, might be afraid, might be tired, or you might be sick, right? There's a lot of feelings that we have. Sometimes we even feel angry or frustrated. Right, and sometimes we feel hurt, absolutely. So when you're feeling angry or frustrated, what happens in your body? It gets a little hurted, yeah. Sometimes you get hot. Yeah, it gets kind of tense. You might talk faster.
It makes your body a little not tough in your normal body.
Right? Sometimes you raise your voice, you might yell at somebody, you might break something when you're angry. Have you ever done that? Have you ever done something when you were angry that you wished you hadn't done? Yeah?
Yeah, and it makes your body a little hurted, and it makes it feel that it's really hurt.
Right. So people get hurt by someone else's anger if that anger is not expressed in a way that is healthy. Right. So what about when you get angry? Sometimes anger and frustration are the hardest feelings to control, and sometimes those feelings are the things that result in people getting hurt.
And then your heart feels a little sad.
Right. So if you don't want to make people's hearts hurt, how do we deal with that anger? What's the best way to deal with that when you feel angry?
Just calm down and
Do you have any special ways of calming down?
counting to 10.
Counting to 10. Anybody else?
Putting your head in a pillow so no one can hear you scream.
Good. Any others?
Going and listening to the audiobook Tom Sawyer so that you don't actually feel that bad.
So listening to books or screaming in a pillow. Sometimes you got to do something with your body, like running or jumping up and down, jumping on the trampoline. So those are all ways to get your angry feelings expressed without hurting other people. Right? So what we want to talk about today then is just in the world, if we can start with our own hearts and if we can take care of our feelings before we hurt somebody else, before we hit somebody, maybe or yell at our little brother because he made us mad, or be angry with our parents or our neighbors or the friends on this play yard, if we can remember to try and have a peaceful heart, and some of those ideas for creating a peaceful heart, then that's the way that we start to create peace in our neighborhoods and peace in our cities and peace in our world. So I want to leave you with the words of another really smart man who lived a long time ago. His name was Black Elk, and he was a Native American. And what he said was, the first peace, which is the most important, is that comes within the soul of people when they realize their relationship, their oneness with the universe and all its powers, and when they realize that at the center of the universe dwells the Great Spirit, and that this center is really everywhere. It is within each of us.
This is a dream. Lord, why did you tell me to love all people? My brothers, my sisters. I have tried, but I come back to you frightened. Lord, I was so peaceful at home. I was so comfortably settled. It was well furnished, and I felt cozy. I was alone. I was at peace, sheltered from the wind and the rain and the mud, and I would have stayed unsullied in my ivory tower. But Lord, you have discovered a breach in my defenses. You have forced me to open my door. And like a squall of rain in the face, the cry of men have awakened me. Like a gale of wind, a friendship has shaken me. As a ray of light slips in unnoticed, your grace has stirred me. And rashly enough, I left my door ajar. And now I am lost. Outside, men were lying in wait for me. I did not know they were so near. In this house, in this street, in this office, in my neighborhood, in my colleagues, among my friends. And as soon as I started to open the door, I saw them with outstretched hands, burning eyes, and longing hearts, like beggars on church steps. And then the first ones came in. There was, after all, some space in my heart. and I welcomed them, and I would have cared for them and fondled them, and my own very own little lambs, my little flock. And you would have been pleased, Lord. I would have served and honored you in a proper and respectable way. Till then, it was sensible. But the next ones, the other men, I had not seen them. They were hidden behind the first ones. And there were more of them, and they were wretched, and they overpowered me without warning. And we had to crowd in, and I had to find room for them. And now they have come from all over in successive waves, pushing one another, jostling one another. And they've come from all over town, from all the parts of the country, of the whole world, numberless and inexhaustible. And they don't come alone anymore. They come in groups, bound one to another. And they come bending under heavy loads of injustice, of resentment, of hate, of suffering. And they drag the world behind them with everything rusted and twisted and badly adjusted. And Lord, they hurt me. They are in the way. They are everywhere. They are too hungry. They are consuming me. And I can't do anything more. As they come in, they push the door, and the door is open wider. My door is wide open. And I can't stand it anymore. It's too much. It's no kind of life. What about my job and my family and my peace and my liberty? And what about me? Lord, I have lost everything, and I don't belong to myself any longer. There's no more room for me at home. Don't worry, God says. You have gained all. While they came into you, I, your God, slipped in among them. Amen.
Someday.
1,000 years ago when I was in elementary school, I realized for the first time that I must face the dreaded peer-related consequences of having the unusual name of Anastasi. I hated that name in those days for several reasons, not the least of which was that it sounded like a girl's name, Anastasi. And then one day, some of my buddies changed the rules on me, and they began calling me by a nickname. And the nickname, instead of Anastasia, was Anesthesia. I think we learned that word in science class. At first, I was happy since I was no longer thought of as a girl. But soon I realized that they could be suggesting that I was inducing sleep with those who were around me. And I really never thought of myself as a sleep-inducing kind of guy. But still, it was better than the other name in my 7-year-old mind in the early 1950s. From that day forward, I have become intimate with the word anesthesia. And it is not only anesthesia that's in the air, it's actually part of my identity. So that's where we began. And now we switch to another track and say, as you know, a couple weeks ago, the Live Oak congregation and the Ventura congregation ordained our very own, the Reverend Kristen Rahm, into the ministry. And it was a proud and beautiful day, and be sure to look at the Acorn this week and see the many pictures that Michelle posted up there. And I think they came from Michael Whitman, who took a lot of pictures. As part of her process of gaining full and final fellowship as a UU minister, last week, Kristen went to Boston, to the UUA headquarters, to attend what they called a new ministry workshop, a week-long workshop on how to get started as a minister, actually doing the work of it. I fondly remember participating in just such an event way back in 1990, soon after I began my ministry in Seattle, over almost 25 years ago. I went to Boston to attend the same workshop then, and I was very glad that they offered it. It was just what I needed in those days since I didn't know what I was doing, and now somebody was going to tell me what to do. I had never been to Boston, of course, which is the Vatican City for Unitarian Universalists. The headquarters of the UUA are right there on Beacon Hill, amid the many other fabulous, historically significant points of interest in Boston, not only for the Unitarians, but for the history of the USA. As you know, the two histories are associated with each other. One day, on a break from the workshop, I went down to Boston Common, which is right across the street. And next to the Common is the Boston Public Garden. Maybe some of you have been there. And I was wandering around, and I came upon a huge memorial statue called the Ether Monument. The Ether Monument. This was a 40-foot tall monument, and it commemorates the first time ether was used as an anesthetic under what became known as the Ether Dome at Massachusetts General. As far as I know, that was in 1846. First time ether was used as an anesthetic. And I think this is the only place that there's a monument to a drug. And of all drugs, there's nothing better than ether, at least it comes in handy sometimes. Some days after that historic first use of ether, the famous poet and essayist Oliver Wendell Holmes put forth the term anesthesia, from the Greek word for lack of feeling. Anesthesia is the Greek word for feeling. It's also the root of the word aesthetic, feeling. I was quite taken with the monument, for I've always thought that anesthesiologists should be honored for the magnificent gifts they have given to humankind. I truly believe that those people who discovered Novocaine, nitrous oxide, and especially ether ought to be given the Nobel Peace Prize. Just think back in your own life experience and imagine what comfort these drugs have brought to you. And it's so good to know there is a monument to ether in Boston. In 1986, I went into the hospital at Kaiser Permanente in Oakland, California, for surgery. I won't detail my particular ailment except to say that it was in the lower part of my body and had to do with my plumbing. Anyway, they gave me a spinal injection of some sort of painkiller, and I was completely numb from my belly button down. But I was awake. So when the procedure began, they also put an IV into my arm and started pumping another anesthetic into me. I think it was probably Valium. And as the surgeons prepared to start cutting, a remarkably beautiful blanket of euphoria clothed me. And I looked into my anesthesiologist's eyes, and I fell in love. What a dreamy guy he was. I later recalled that I've never felt so much connected to any person in my life. To this day, I think about him, and although I don't remember his name, he will ever be my old flame, as Peggy Lee used to sing about. Such is the value of anesthesia. Imagine that, an actual, quantifiable, controllable method by which you can alleviate pain. Imagine the ramifications of that. Oh, that we could find something to take away our pain. This is why the monument at Boston Public Garden is so important to me, and maybe you too, if you ever had a filling in one of your teeth or had your teeth pulled. I had a tooth pulled just a couple weeks ago. You know the value of anesthetic. And so, if you want to know more about this, there is a website. It's called endorphin.tv. And you can learn about these anesthetic drugs, including the kind that are natural, as in the endorphins in your brain. The brain is an astonishingly sophisticated organism, and somehow it knows and it understands and it can deliver the goods. Imagine that. Imagine how that happens to be true. Where did that technology in the brain come from? What design or whose design made that possible, that your brain can anesthetize itself and your body? On the website, you can read of a discussion of these things, including comments from a famous anesthesiologist named Dr. Peter Passwater, which I think is one of the greatest names ever given to a human being. He said, pain perception is hardwired into our nervous system via neurotransmitters and other chemical messages. Equally important, our immune system produces chemical messengers that can either transmit or stop that pain. And of course, there are all kinds of pain in our lives. Sometimes it's that physical kind of pain. Mostly, though, the pain we know in our lives is psychological pain. It is emotional pain. And maybe it's even spiritual pain. In psychological terms, we go into therapy seeking to undo the emotional denial into which we've placed ourselves, that kind of human anesthesia, a time-honored way of relieving the pain. Sometimes we say we are living in the land of denial, which is not located in Egypt, but in our own minds. And as you know, our culture is full of, we might even say, is predicated on the idea of forgetting pain. Just watch television for 10 seconds, and you will see a myriad of offers of how you can buy ways to put something or other out of your mind. Madison Avenue offers a plethora of solutions for the dilemma, from mouthwashes, which mask the smell of your actual breath, to dating services, to insurance policies, to genuine drugs which do, in fact, stop the pain, Advil, Tylenol, aspirin. They all offer the same thing, a way to forget the pain. And so, speaking of Madison Avenue, let us look at the manner in which our society creates and encourages what I call cultural anesthesia. For instance, as a culture, we are instructed to forget, to put out of our minds, to not remember certain aspects of our history, even here in America, the history which we find uncomfortably painful. The list is long and full of what sometimes have been called the sins of the fathers for the very founding of our nation on such immoral and criminal acts as genocide, slavery, and warfare domination. And even now, on this day, we are being persuaded not to remember one of the most important legacies of all, the reckless and preposterous culture of violence which incessantly plagues our society. This phenomenon is currently in the news with a debate which is sometimes bordering on inanity about gun violence. And once more, we are experiencing the effects of cultural anesthesia. You all know the story that even after the horrific killing of school children in Newtown, as well as Aurora and Blacksburg and Columbine and so many other places, we seem to forget the value of a true human decency as a way to move forward in the culture and in the society. And for me, in this way, the notion of anesthesia becomes religious. Actually, the notion from the Greek word aesthesia, which means not feeling, and of all the institutions in modern culture, and I truly, truly believe this, none is more consistently incorporating the idea of remembering than in the religious community. Of all in all religions and in all cultures, we're continually asked to remember and to honor the traditions and the heritage that come from our past. And we are especially asked to recall the meaning of that history and the important values and the important truths that we have learned from our past. And so it is from Jesus to Moses to Hannibal to Hammurabi, I meant to say, and to Lao Tzu, to the Buddha, and all the great prophets in history, we hear this message. And we tell the stories and recall the great myths which push us to remember the truth about our human beings, that we actually can positively accomplish something when we listen to what Abraham Lincoln called our better angels. Those better angels are always there, waiting to empower us to do the right thing. Years ago, I was called to jury duty in a notorious murder case in Seattle. For whatever reason, I was not picked, although I think the reason was that during the interview, they asked what I did for a living, and I said I was a Unitarian Universalist minister, and I think that's when it went click. We don't want him, because this is a murder trial after all. But I was disappointed in not being picked, because I think the public needs people who think like Unitarian Universalists to be on juries, and especially juries having to do with big crimes like murder. Our views on morality and ethics are strong and worthy and need to be heard by everywhere in the culture. And that, after all, is the issue here. What does the public think about guns and violence? And what's the general opinion of the culture? And where does the public get those thoughts about violence? We know we can see it on TV, we can see it in the papers, the media is loaded with it, and even the halls of Congress are loaded with the idea that violence solves problems, and that if there's ever any kind of conflict, all we got to do is train the guns in on the perpetrators and we will be over. The culture seems to have unwritten and yet very powerful beliefs about this. And I always want to know, where do those beliefs come from? And where do the counter beliefs come from? Where do people hear the truth about the possibilities of human goodness in the world? Where else but in the church, in the congregation, in the community of faith, in the group where people have gathered together in religious community, a community of faith and belief in the possibilities of human goodness. This means we are responsible for this. The responsibility of letting the world know the truth about this issue of violence and even about this issue of gun violence rests at our front door, just like that poem I read. We have a responsibility. This country, this culture, this American dream is so remarkably violent, and it's so unlike other so-called first world countries. One of the salient features of our central public belief seems to be the grand glorification of violence. So I ask that we confront this issue that we see all around us, and that we do what we can do. There are many things we can't do, and there are things that we can do. Maybe one of those things is to take small steps, even though they're just tiny steps, to attempt to eliminate the incredibly easy access to violence, for instance, which comes from the incredibly easy access to guns, which probably should be outlawed. Truthfully, we have to do something, and the truth is that the fact faces us, and we must respond. For instance, have you seen the stories in papers around the country which are offering money or payments for people who bring in their guns? I love the notion of New York when they were exchanging guns for toys, or tickets to concerts, or to the Super Bowl, or just plain cash. And why not? And what about declaring weapons-free zones? Remember when people were doing things like that? We did that in my Seattle church. We put a bright yellow ribbon all the way around our property, which was about half a city block. And the yellow ribbon said, weapons-free zone. And did it make a difference? I don't know. But I'm glad we did it, because somebody needs to stand up and say this madness has got to stop. And I can't imagine a more appropriate group of people to do that than the people of the church. I remember the first weapons-free zone sign that I saw was, of all places, in an emergency room in a hospital. And I thought, well, this makes sense. You come to a hospital to be made better, to be healed. This is not a place where you need to be toting a gun in. And maybe the same thing is true of a church. Why do people come to a church? But to be saved, but to be healed, but to be given the options of living a better and more fulfilled life for them and their families. They don't come here to be harmed. I think that the irrevocable inherent violence that they say is in the human animal is not true. We do have this ability to think about these things. And I believe we have the ability to religiously examine these things and say, there's got to be a better way. We have millions of examples of human beings who have moved far away from that behavior. We lift these people up as models of human behavior. Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr., Jesus, lots of people who talked about nonviolence, who talked about loving one another, even our enemies. We have evidence of myriad human accomplishments which positively indicate that we shall overcome whatever propensity for violence that we may have. And millions of these cases, we have overcome that propensity. And in most cases, the great accomplishments have come because people believed in them. They had faith in them. They gave their lives to a more powerful faith which says human good is absolutely possible and attainable. And our history books are filled with women and men who chose to jump out of the mainstream in order to fulfill a dream of some potent goodness and achievement. I am one who says that this should be a foremost goal of the religious quest. The great scriptures of humanity, the eternal words coming from the prophets and seers and saviors throughout time all point to an authentic goodness, a positive grandeur of human potential. So it's time to get on the bus. Today, after this service, we will be engaging in a get-together where we'll ask the question, what can we do? What is it possible that our little congregation here in Goleta, California, what can we do to confront this monumental evil taking possession of the world? For me, the very first thing that we can do are the beginning words of the song we're going to sing right now in our hymnal. The song is on page 162, but you probably already know it. And if you do, I want you to sing from the very bottoms of your feet to the very tops of your heads and believe this song as you're singing it. Let us rise in body and spirit and sing, I'm going to lay down my sword and shield.